Nicholas Bornois of Capitaling. I just wanted to welcome you to another great panel on the LPG sector. We have with us Ben Nolan from Stifel, who is going to moderate the panel, and Ben is going to introduce our panelists. We have four great panelists with us, 4 great companies. Thank you to all of you for joining. And Ben, the floor is yours. John, Oeyvind, Harry, and Oystein, thank you very much.
Great, and thank you, Nicholas. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to do this. And this is you know, in shipping, either you're popular, as is the case at the moment, or nobody ever wants to see you, which I think I am certainly familiar with. At the moment, we're popular in almost all categories, and that includes LPG, which is probably one of the smaller subsectors. But certainly things are happening, as has been discussed in the conference today already. And I think, as we'll begin with, Russia has major implications for all things energy, and that certainly includes LPG. And you know, at the same time, oil prices are high, and there's read-throughs there. But we'll dive into all that. Super excited to have the panel, because in this particular case, I think maybe more than any of the other panels I've been on as relates to LPG, this one is diverse. So we've got the big VLGCs represented by John and Dorian and Oystein with Avance. We've got sort of the medium-sized specialty vessels with Oeyvind and Navigator, and then Harry has some of the smaller pressurized and feeder ships. So really the whole spectrum of LPG shipping, we're very close to it, represented here today. So I think hopefully we can cover a lot of ground, and the sooner I stop talking, the more ground that we can cover. So so I'll stop there. Well, that was a paltry introduction. I probably should do you guys justice, and maybe we'll have you each give a little introduction to your own company. That way you can do better with it than I did. But John, how about you? A few seconds on Dorian, and then we'll go Oystein, Harry, and
we operate 21 VLGCs at Dorian LPG, and we operate a pool as well called the Helios LPG pool, and we operate there about 30 ships, which is a collaboration with MOL. We have corporate headquarters where I sit in Connecticut, with commercial department in Denmark, and the technical operations and marine in Greece. We've been public since 2014, and we trade in the New York Stock Exchange.
Oystein.
Yes, okay, thank you. I'm Oystein Kalleklev, Executive Chairman of Avance Gas. We are also a VLGC player, i.e. the big LPG ships. We have 14 on the water. We announced a sale of one of our older ships last week, so we have sold 2 ships recently, and we're also taken delivery of 2 new builds this year with LPG propulsion. So it's a bit similar to the LNG ships, where you are eating off the cargo. Part of the cargo you consume as fuel, which is of course a much more environmental friendly fuel to consume. And then we also have 4 more of these dual fuel VLGCs for delivery the next 18 months. We are listed on Oslo Stock Exchange, ticker AGAS.
Harry.
I'm the founder and CEO of StealthGas. We've been listed on the NASDAQ since 2005. We operate and own 45 gas carriers of pressurized ships, 22K 7F ships, and MGCs. And our ticker symbol is GASS.
Great. You know,
yeah, hello everyone. Well, Navigator, we sit kind of in the middle of the VLGCs and what Harry's core business is. We specialize in ethylene and ethane shipping and semi-refrigerated capability. So slightly different. We also have a joint venture with Enterprise Product Partners with the world's largest ethylene export terminal in the US. So we're linking infrastructure with the maritime side of Navigator. And I'm sure we're going to get into the positives of that later on. We've been listed on NYSE with the ticker NVGS since 2013. I'm looking forward to the questions, Ben.
All right. Well, let's start with the topic du jour, and certainly, I think the thing that would be at the forefront of most people's minds these days. How does, well, first of all, let's start with how involved or how big of a player is Russia and Ukraine within the LPG space, and just in terms of trying to get a sense of what the disruptions might look like. And then after we sort of have a handle on their presence, we'll talk about maybe some of the read-throughs of what's happening in the market at the moment. So I don't know, any takers on that first topic with Russia's presence?
Well, Ben, can I take the floor?
Sure, yeah, please do.
I checked on Waterborne, and I see that the exports from Russia, from both the Baltic and the Black Sea ports, were 2,900,000 tons in 2019, 1,300,000 tons in 2020, and 680,000 in 2021, which shows that there's a declining shipborne product coming out of Russia in the last few years. Presumably, some product has been going by pipe rather than by ship, and that's why there has been a decline. So I think as a percentage of the whole market, which is over 100 million tons, this represents about 1 to 2% of the entire shipborne LPG capacity. So I don't think it is a significant amount.
I think I can concur with that. Europe last year, so not from the Black Sea, but European import of Russian gas was about 1.5 million tons, but 1.25 of that was on rail. So on the shipping side, from the Baltic and to Europe is minuscule, with John's comment about 100 and plus million tons of seaborne. So purely maritime on the LPG side, at least to Europe, it's quite small. But of course, there's other ripple effects which are more dramatic.
Right. So let's stick with that for the moment, and let's say, as you said, Oeyvind, 1.5 million tons if you include both the 600,000 that's being exported by sea and then the other 2/3 that moved by rail. If that were to stop, if both rail and seaborne volumes were to go away, is there sufficient excess capacity? Is there another 1.5 million tons of underutilized LPG export capacity that could serve or step up to meet the demands of Europe in particular for LPG, or are we pretty close to full capacity, as is the case, let's say, with LNG, right? Everybody's running as hard as they possibly can. Any thoughts there?
I think the US will play a role here. They can turn on the taps on the LPG side. The Europeans have a problem, right? I mean, the energy is being shut off from the east, so they have to find a solution as a substitute. And even on handy-sized ships, so 4 times as small as the VLGCs, we see an increasing demand, or at least cargo quotes from the US East Coast to Europe, also from Algeria to Europe. So it's the classic situation whereby if your closest supplier is unavailable, you go to the second closest or the third closest. But US will rise up to the challenge and provide the Europeans with the energy that they need. LPG perhaps a bit easier than LNG, but the capacity, I believe, is there. If not, it'll come.
And to complement what he was talking about, Oeyvind, that there are receiving installations, terminals that can take quite a lot of LPG. So the ability to receive the product is well available everywhere in Europe. There's no shortage of that. So the terminals are there. I think it could be easily be ramped up where from the smaller ships to the bigger ships, they can go and deliver the LPG that is needed. Actually, we had a ship delivering cargo to Brunsbüttel in Germany just last week, a few days ago, and they said, "Thank you for coming. Our tanks were empty here. We need all the cargo we can get." We were discharging about 25,000 tons, and they were thankful for having that product there, the LPG product that is. So there is plenty of ability to receive a lot of cargo in all around Europe.
I would like to say a comment that I think the effect is mostly felt on the ammonia exports, as Ukraine and Russia are very important markets for ammonia. The majority of the ammonia is transported on MGCs, LGCs in a lesser extent. And last year, 4.1 million tons was exported from Russia and about 500,000 from Ukraine. And Russian tons were moved by pipeline and train through Ukraine. So that's a small addition to what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's good color, and not something that I had seen just in terms of that order of magnitude. So, and you know, we don't really have much. There's a little bit of medium-sized gas carrier exposure here, but not a whole lot of ammonia specific. But we'll maybe circle back around. I appreciate that color here, because we'll circle back around to ammonia in a little bit. I don't know. Oystein, I didn't want to. If you had, I knew you were going to make a comment there.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with John. You know, my numbers is Russian seaborne LPG transport is like 1 million tons, so it's about 1% of the market, and most is by rather rail and pipeline. So the LPG market this year is expecting to grow about 5%, which is like more than 5 million tons. So I do think it's feasible to cover this. I think it's more a problem at the refineries. You know, if you have shutdowns of crude oil from Russia, and a lot of the LPG supply in Europe is from the refineries, and certainly if the refineries in Europe are reducing their utilization levels to compensate for the lack of crude access, that could have some bigger implication on the LPG market in Europe.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I think we'll get to the where those replacement volumes come from in a minute, but it's I think extremely topical and clearly tied. But before we finish on it, Harry, again, I appreciate you bringing up the ammonia side. Are there any other implications as it relates to some of the other petrochemical gases? I know that is something that probably Harry and Oeyvind are a little bit more exposed to, be it, you know, butadiene or whatever, all the propylenes and ethylenes and everything else that tends to move on the smaller assets. Is Russia and Ukraine very big, either in the input or the output side of either or any of that sort of specialty business?
We don't have ships carrying ethane, so I would let the others talk about that. But as you understand, for example, we were speaking to an ammonia trader, and the Ukrainian army has blown up some of the key bridges and rail hubs, which will take. They were telling us it will take at least 2 years to fix. So potentially, the absence of these tons may reduce demand in the short term, but the impact may be offset by the increased ton-mile demand as markets in Europe and Asia can be covered to a smaller extent by the Middle East and the Caribbean. And of course, all these events and distractions, of course, don't only affect ammonia, but some of the other products you mentioned in your questions.
So you have a situation then, Ben, when you talk about petrochemicals. So the question is, where does the feedstock come from for the production of European petrochemicals? So the guys, the companies who've been using naphtha, you know, they're in trouble. I mean, it'd be crazy to use naphtha, particularly Russia has been a big supplier of naphtha. You know, at this price, and you don't have the feedstock, it'd be crazy to continue that. So you look then to across the pond to the US, you have competitively priced ethane and other derivatives. So we've seen a big pull, a switch for European interest across the whole board, including LPG, but the more so on petrochemicals. Ethane as feedstock, whether they crack it themselves or sell it as, injected into nat gas and sell it like that, but also ethylene, and there will be implication of propylene. So this has a big ripple effect through the petrochemical supply chain. And US will be the supplier of Europe of most of these products, whether it's feedstock or derivatives, which means longer voyages.
Right. Well, that's a good segue. Thanks for that, Oeyvind. Now, talking about North America, certainly the U.S. being the primary component of that, but Canada is also part of the discussion here. At this point, really, over the last 15 years, the U.S. has gone from not really involved in LPG exports at all, and then also many of the other, whether it's ethane or ethylene, some of the other products, to now being the dominant player. And so as we look forward, again, we talked a little bit, or we didn't really get to too much detail, and it's not your business, so I don't expect you to know about how much nascent capacity or extra capacity is available out of North America. But ultimately, it would seem as though North America is well positioned to be the provider of all of those things, the incremental swing provider of all of those things, maybe a little bit the Middle East as well. But in your conversations with your customers, what are you guys hearing about potential further expansions and increases in U.S. infrastructure that will help fill the gap, as you say, Oeyvind, as people look to diversify away from naphtha, or are just looking for a broader base of energy security, or are using more petrochemicals, and all of the things that are driving demand quite substantially here. Somehow or another, if that's going to be met, the infrastructure needs to be put into place first. And so, what are you guys hearing about those developments? And I don't know.
Well, let me just say something. Before COVID hit in 2020, the beginning of 2020, all the facilities, all the export terminals in the U.S. were on major expansion projects. Some of them were completed in 2020. Some of them had been completed already by 2019, 2020. And some of them continued, some of them were canceled to be completed later. So because why did they do that? Because we were hitting the ceiling of their capacity in the previous year, in 2019 and 2018. We were starting to see terminals having, sending out top amounts of product. And they projected that, in 2019, for example, the terminals exported 40 million tons from the United States. The United States exported 40 million tons. And then in 2020, we exported 46 million tons. And then in 2021, 51 million tons. So obviously they have put in the capacity, because I think their nameplate was about 45 million at that time. They expanded enough to be able to do probably now nearly to 65%. So we think that the ability of the terminals now right now, the export terminal utilization is running at about 80%. So there is at least a 20% margin of utilization of the terminals to go for, to support any kind of expansion. And so I believe that we will not need any additional capacity right now, additions to that. So I'll stop there. Maybe my colleagues can talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think maybe I can add, of course, we do expect supply growth to be 5-6% both this year and next year. This year, everything will come from US. And then if you're looking at the agreements or that the Biden administration is doing with the European Union, it's certainly the fact that the Europeans now will try to be less dependent of the Russians. And I really do see that this will translate into a lot more drilling in the US, not only LNG, but also LPG. So I think it's fair to bet that US supply growth will just continue. It's been on a 20% CAGR since 2015, and we don't really see it stopping anytime soon.
If I also can add something, it's not only the US. I think the Middle East will increase production and exports as well. But we have to have in mind also the downside risk that there might be a severe GDP lowering due to the very high inflation, high commodity prices, and very strict COVID-19 restrictions in Asia and China in particular.
But I think it's a shot in the arm for the US midstream and production sectors. So it depends on how quickly can the US turn around with the drilling and so forth in the wet plays for LPG or natural gas liquids. But I don't know, I think I agree with John that the terminal capacity is there for increased export. I don't know how quickly or the status of the fractionation. So it's fine that you drill it, but do you have enough fractionation capacity today to produce? I don't know. But that could be a bottleneck. But if there's a will, there's a way for the American midstream companies to solve that.
Yeah, I agree. But I also agree with Harry. I think there's macro risk that needs to be taken into account. Although I would think that in this kind of an environment, perhaps more than in other situations or other cycles, there may be an element of, and this might just be optimistic, but it's a shipping forum, so it's the right place for it. But the LPG market, maybe the energy markets in general, might be a little bit more inelastic than they otherwise would be, given the need for energy security and so even if there's a slowdown, maybe even of oil consumption, some of the other areas like LNG and LPG might be able to continue to see healthier demand growth. We'll see. But before we get off the topic of infrastructure and export capacity and even fractionation capacity, a question did come in that ties in pretty nicely to that. It's what's your view on LPG originating from South American countries and Mexico going forward, and how do you think about those markets as they relate to the broader LPG market? Any thoughts on Latin and South America?
Well, the obvious one would be Venezuela, at least for Navigator and the handysize ships. So trading in Venezuela on LPG has been under OFAC restriction for a number of years. It used to be the largest customer and charter of handysize LPG ships on the coast in Venezuela. that might change in the current environment, and that will be a benefit or a boost to the industry or the segment. For Navigator gas, in terms of South America, it's more petrochemical driven and not LPG, and so I leave it to the others to answer.
I think with the pushback Biden got with this agreement or trying making an agreement with the Venezuelans, I think we should not hope for Venezuela bouncing back anytime soon.
Yeah, I think they have, unfortunately for Venezuela, they have problems that supersede agreements. There's it's from what I understand, it's a mess down there. But all right, good. So now let's shift gears a little bit here, being mindful of time. And I think one of the really exciting things for me covering the LPG space and is the opportunities for new trades, which it doesn't really happen much, but that, you know, shipping is a very ancient business, and most things that have been shipped are being shipped have been shipped for a long time. But you certainly do, as we've already talked about, demand growth 5-6% just for regular LPG. There are other products that are either developing or similar or shipped by your companies that are not as maybe a little bit segmented or in their infancy. We'll start with the petrochemical side. Again, we're talking with probably in this case it's mostly Stealth and Navigator who would have most of the petrochemical side, but and then we'll circle back to the LPG in a second. But you know, for Harry, for you guys, and for Oeyvind, petrochemicals are a pretty important part of the absolute mix of business that you're doing. If LPG is growing at 5 to 6%, maybe even better than that, how do you frame in some of the other tangential or associated trades and the growth in those markets?
We don't. Our main business is LPG as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, we carry other things, other products like VCM or butadiene or products like that.
Yeah.
But I would say, generally speaking, 80 to 85% of what we carry is LPG. And obviously for us, the COVID and COVID restrictions were quite negative on the demand side. Hopefully now with COVID slowly disappearing, we will hopefully see again a bigger increase. Unfortunately, we have the war, which again, you know, freezes things. And on the other hand, we have the new restrictions in China and in major cities in China, which again is a negative. But obviously, since LPG in general is used for so many different uses, we hope and we think that sooner or later we're going to see again a big jump. And we should not forget that LPG is obviously greener than oil or coal or other energies that ships might carry, and therefore has also the green element in it, which should help people choosing it over other probably available more dirtier energy choices.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll get to ammonia in that respect here shortly. But LPG also, just even propane, is being used in some of your own vessels for fuel. So we'll pivot to that, but maybe just lastly, as we talk about some of the petrochemical gases and ethylene and some of that sort of thing. Oeyvind, I know you guys are pretty big into that market. How do you compare that to the traditional LPG market?
I mean, the petrochemical industry is developing. The trade lanes are changing somewhat. I think the world has changed over the last 4 weeks. And we've seen a larger pull on US ethane and ethylene to Europe, but also to Asia. So post the dip in February, we've seen March and April go from strength to strength on that particular subsegment. But now we see that those virtual pipelines, we call it, to connecting America with Europe and Asia are strengthening. So there's a big pull on that, and that's a direct impact of everything that's happening. Well, this is not a new trade, but it's being strengthened.
Right. Which should, as more of your vessels are being used for things like ethane and ethylene, it's taking them out perhaps of the propane and butane markets, which increases demand for everyone else. So but Harry, you'd mentioned marine fuel. I don't know how many panels or how many years now we've been talking about changes in marine fuel, but certainly one of the areas that people that come up a lot is one of the fuels is ammonia, specifically green ammonia or blue ammonia, depending on how it's made. That is an LPG cargo. As we talked about, a lot of what you guys do is not ammonia. I think there's some of it, but in my mind, at least, if a substantial portion of marine fuel in the future ends up being ammonia, and granted, it could be other things like LNG too, but for our purposes here, if it is ammonia, how does that fit in with your strategic plans going forward? I mean, again, maybe we'll start with, we haven't heard from John and Oystein a little bit. You guys don't really do too much of that now, but you could, right? If LPG and ammonia, is going to be a bigger market, is that something that you're interested in participating in, or do you have a different view and maybe, that's not the direction you want to go?
John. I can jump in because was it John first maybe?
No, you Oystein, go ahead.
So of course we have, as I mentioned, we have 2 new dual fuel LPG, so it means it can burn LPG in addition to compliant fuel. But our next 4, they are ammonia ready, so you can burn ammonia as fuel on those as well, and one of those 4 we will also be upgrading the tanks so that you can also carry ammonia. The reason for us doing it is, of course, the fact that it's pretty cheap and simple to do these upgrades when you're building these new buildings. So it has a nice optionality value. But of course, in terms of ammonia as a marine fuel, I think, today 99% at least of all ammonia being made is black ammonia. Right. So it's for the most part, you take a natural gas and you drive it through a very energy intensive process called the Haber-Bosch process. So you're starting with the hydrocarbons and then you're using a lot more hydrocarbons in order to end up with ammonia. So then you go from a non-corrosive, non-toxic feedstock and you end up with a toxic and corrosive feedstock after spending a lot of energy making it. So it's, I think first you should try to get all the ammonia being made, and it's quite substantial. First you have to green that, and once you're getting to that process that you have been able to green the current production of ammonia, then let's start talking about ammonia as a fuel, because it's not cheap either. So it has some drawbacks compared to using LPG and LNG for sure, and it's more expensive. And I do think we should focus on greening the existing rather than jumping into this as the next silver bullet, because it's not really a silver bullet.
Okay, can I add something to this? What Oystein was saying about ammonia. I believe the big view is that ammonia will be used for carriage of hydrogen, not for burning or whatever. First of all, there hasn't been an engine yet to burn ammonia. It will happen at some point in the future. Secondly, the engine may need fuel as a pilot. So you have to deal with that and the emissions of that, and the emissions of the NOx that the ammonia engine produces. So these are a lot of technical issues to overcome for an engine burning ammonia. So let's just concern ourselves perhaps with the transport of ammonia, which may be the way to transport hydrogen, which may be a lot cleaner to burn. And then I think most of the ships can carry ammonia, even our ships can carry ammonia, can be converted to carry ammonia. Okay, we cannot carry a full tank, maybe not 100% or 80 to 98% as we normally load for LPG, but we can load probably 80 to 85%. It's just a matter of the weight of the product. The temperature can be carried at 38 minus, which is very well within the limits of our ships, the existing ships. So it's not a big issue to do that. The issue is the danger of the chemical, the protection, the additional bits and pieces that you need to put on a ship to be able to carry ammonia, which are not significant. It can be converted easily to carry ammonia. So that's a technical side of that. But as Oystein said, I mean, you know, to produce ammonia, just to say that we're going to be doing ammonia is, you know, especially gray ammonia is not going to happen. And I think green is going to cost a lot of money until probably much later in this decade. So we should figure ways to improve our emissions, not by just talking about fairy tales, but about actual, you know, things that we can do to improve our vessel's performance and reduce the greenhouse gas footprint.
I maybe just want to add one more thing, because I'm coming from the LNG industry where we talk a lot about methane slip. You can't almost go to a meeting without talking about methane slip. So methane is like 28 times worse than CO2 emissions. That's why we have a gas combustion unit in our funnel to burn the methane, to rather emit CO2. But if you are burning ammonia, then you can have ammonia slip. So methane 28 times worse. This is almost 300 times worse than CO2. And so if you're not burning that, then if you're venting it, you have nitrous oxide emission, and this is laughing gas. So these are extremely potent and much more potent than CO2 and methane. So we haven't really solved that question, whether you can avoid this emissions entirely, because if you're just having a small part ammonia slip, then you are ruining the whole calculation.
Great. Well, and then lastly, for as we're talking about sort of new or emergent themes or businesses, something that is very emergent and maybe a brand new cargo that has never been carried, at least very commercially in the past, is CO2. We were talking about cleaning up the existing ammonia streams. Well, how would you do that? By capturing the carbon, right? You would do that. You could potentially do the same thing with, you know, all sorts of other areas of carbon capture. But what are you going to do with it then, or with all the CO2 that's captured? And so I know that there's been a number of companies, including, I know Navigator has been working on CO2 shipping to move it to other places and other regions. I'll start, I guess, with you, Oeyvind, since you guys are pretty involved in it. How should you frame this in for people? It doesn't exist today, but given that you guys are investing in it, how do you think 10 years from now the CO2 shipping business will look? And is it going to be LPG companies generally that are involved in it, or is it just a very small niche market? Or I don't know, how, for somebody that's spending money on it, how do you think of CO2 shipping?
It's infancy, so I will quote you, Ben. You aptly put it, Navigator becoming a very expensive garbage man. So it is very expensive today. Will it be cheaper in the future? Who knows? But that their interest for shipping companies to be part of that logistic chain for carbon capture, storage, and rejection, absolutely. But again, like anything, innovation, pioneering work, it takes time. And this is not going to be a big thing tomorrow. Maybe it will be, I don't know. But that there are projects out there that you can participate. Because remember, CO2 is transported as a liquid gas. So it should be our competence to know, to have the wherewithal with that. But again, you know, 2030, yes, maybe you have more than one ship. One ship is being built today, but anyhow, it has potential.
It's good. No order book. You know, that's a shipping segment you like, Ben.
Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about the order book. There is an order book in LPG shipping, or at least in parts of LPG shipping. If you look at the VLGCs and some of the medium-sized carriers, it's a little bit north of 20%. We were just talking about demand growing 5 to 6%. How nervous does it make you if your order book is on a gross basis, let's call it, you know, that's delivered over 2 years, so 10% per year gross fleet growth against 5%, 5 to 6% demand growth? And any thoughts? And Harry, we'll come to you in a second, because I know the smaller vessels have completely different story, but quickly on the big ones.
Yeah, I think on the big ones, it's 20% order book, or 66 ships last time I checked, but there's also 15% of the ships being older than 20 years. And we have this new regulation coming into force next year, EEXI, carbon intensity indicator, and fuel prices are very high these days. So the more efficient ships are, you know, I think the fuel prices is going to do as much as the EEXI to get rid of older ships. But you know, we do have to admit that it's a bit lumpy. So this year it's okay. Next year's a lot of ships, but with where new buildings prices are going this year, you know, the order book for 24 is like 5 ships, and with the capacity being taken at the big yards for container ship and LNG ships, and prices going up quite a lot. So we built new buildings here to below 80. The new building prices today are above 90, even to people talking in the mid 90s. So new building prices are up, which is going to disincentivize ordering of these ships. So yeah, next year quite a few ships, but you know, longer term, if you're looking at, let's say 22, 23, 24, 25, and then looking at the fleet composition and fuel prices and EEXI, I'm not too worried.
I'm where Oystein is, more or less. I think that you know, there's going to be a slowdown of most of the existing fleet with the 2023 regulations. So we will see ships going slower to comply with the regulations, to reduce emissions, to reduce their greenhouse gases. So I think that will be the first, if you like, obstacle or to overcome. And then every year from 2023 onwards, ships need to improve their carbon index, their CII, by reducing at a certain percentage, which has already been decided by IMO. So we're going to be seeing these older ships either going away because they're too old that they will not do any work on these ships, or the younger ships, the eco ships, are going to stay on and improve with various devices, improvements, carbon capture, all kinds of additional fittings that will improve their profile for greenhouse gases. So I believe, you know, we need to do a lot of work on our ships to make them greener. And I am disappointed that the shipyards have not done a lot more up to date. They should have done a lot more rather than just producing a dual fuel engine. They should have done a lot more. So that's what I think. So
we're running out of time, Harry. The smaller, the pressurized and smaller refrigerated vessels, the order book is de minimis, right? Almost nothing. Has been for a long time. Usually a order book that has nothing on order in a market that's growing is really strong landscape for protracted returns, good returns. It's been okay, but it hasn't been protracted good returns. How do you sort of think through the supply side of the supply and demand market for the smaller vessels? And we're running out of time, but I wanted to make sure it's an important question for you.
I'll be quick. Indeed, the order book is small in combination with a really old fleet, which in shipping, that's, you know, the magic recipe. Of course, the rates were in very, very good shape just before COVID hit. Then we had approximately the 2 years of COVID where obviously rates were okay, but nothing exciting. But recently, the last 2 months, maybe, we have seen quite firm rates, especially as we're heading towards spring. And we hope that without new COVID headaches and new variants, that this will lead to at least 10 to 20% increase on the day rates of pressurized ships.
Great. Well, we are a little over time. Let me get my favorite question that I've been asking for, I don't know, 15 years or a long time. I give you, because I'm a benevolent, nice guy, $100 million. What do you do with $100 million in the context of your company today? We'll start in reverse order. Oeyvind, $100 million, where's it go?
Infrastructure connecting our fleet.
Infrastructure. Harry, $100 million, what do you do with it?
I would invest in my second US listed company that has gone up by, and don't laugh, 1,400% in the last 2 months.
Okay, there we go. Oystein, $100 million.
We recently sold 2 ships and released $45 million, so we have enough cash. So I'll probably pay some more dividends then.
All right. All right. John, last word.
Improve the viability of the ships to trade into 2040.
All right. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. And Nicholas, I know I'm over time, sorry, but I appreciate you bearing with me there. So.
No, it was perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, John, Oeyvind, Harry, and Oystein. Great panel, as expected. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.